The opposition as currently constituted has two camps. The first camp is run by Rigathi Gachagua. The second camp is run by Uhuru Kenyatta. So you have technically the Uhuru versus Rigathi camp. These two camps, the reason as to why I'm using versus, have very competing interests. And by competing interest, I mean Rigathi wants Kalonzo to be the flag bearer of the so-called united opposition, whereas Uhuru Kenyatta wants Matiangi to be the flag bearer of the same outfit. So that is why I said they have competing interests. The question is, which stooge is likely to win? And before you fume and scroll away, the use of the term stooge here is not in any way condescending. It is simply saying and stating the facts. If you are vying on behalf of someone, if you are vying to pursue the interest of someone, then you are considered a stooge, or what we call a pawn. Either way, you are doing it not because of your own desires and plans, but to come and effect the plans of another. We saw this, ladies and gentlemen, in 2002, when Uhuru Kenyatta was vying against Mwai Kibaki. He was considered a stooge not because people hated him, but because he had been appointed to run as president by Moi, who people were getting rid of. So technically, the belief was Moi wanted to extend his rule through Uhuru Kenyatta. And in some cases, stooges are very easy to notice because look at how Uhuru Kenyatta became the presidential candidate in 2002. He was nominated, appointed a minister, and Viola nominated the presidential candidate. It was so fast, everybody could see that Moi was going to use the young man then. That is the same thing that is happening today with Fred Okengo Matiangi. Matiangi is a civil servant. In fact, before he joined Jubilee government, he was a teacher. And so, when he joined, Matiangi did not participate in any elective politics. But yet you saw Jubilee Party, even before Matiangi could announce his interest, Jubilee Party was all over saying that Matiangi will be their candidate. In fact, he is one of the very few presidential candidates in the country whose candidature was announced by a political party he didn't even belong to begin with. But yet they announced that he would be their candidate. And in fact, when he came back to the country, the Jubilee people went to meet him at the airport. And recently, they not only brought Matiangi into Jubilee Party, they also gave him the position of the deputy party leader. Remember, he has never been in Jubilee Party. He was picked from elsewhere and brought in and given that position. That smells and screams a stooge. So, like I said, using the stooge here is just explaining the facts. Let's go to the other side of Rigathi. Kalonzo Musyoka is not vying for the first time, so you can't say that his candidature is hurried. However, what makes Kalonzo Musyoka a stooge of Rigathi Gachagua is that Rigathi Gachagua is already making demands about his presidency. Rigathi stated, and I quote when he was in a church in Machakos, that they would support, they meaning Mount Kenya, would support Kalonzo Musyoka. In return, they will keep the title deed of the presidency. In fact, recent media reports were that Rigathi had already demanded 50% from Kalonzo Musyoka. It means that Kalonzo Musyoka will be going into the poll on behalf of Rigathi Gachagua, who, by the virtue of being impeached, cannot vie. The same for Uhuru Kenyatta. Uhuru Kenyatta has served his 2 terms, and so there is no way he can contest for a 3rd term. He needs somebody to do it. And that brings us to the 2 politicians, the ones I called stooges, Fred Matiangi and Kalonzo Musyoka. Who is likely to go and face William Ruto? 2 things to help us determine who is likely to win. And by the way, if you're finding value from our videos, consider subscribing to the channel so that you're notified whenever we produce videos of this nature. And also don't forget to like this particular video and share it with your friends. Like I said, 2 things are going to help us understand who is likely to win. Number 1 is the financial might. Like, who can traverse this country? Which stooge can get the financial support to traverse the whole country looking for votes? And the other thing that can help us determine who is likely to fly the opposition ticket is real ground support. Let's now begin with the financial support. Like I said, Matiangi is being pushed to vie by Uhuru Kenyatta. I already did a video detailing the reasons why Uhuru Kenyatta is desperately pushing Fred Matiangi to vie as president come 2027. I also shared with you why Rigathi Gachagua is so much interested in using Kalonzo Musyoka to settle political scores with William Ruto. So we are not going to revisit the reasons behind the push for candidature. However, I'm going to look at who has the might to push their stooge. Does Rigathi have serious financial support that can help Kalonzo Musyoka move across the country? The answer to that is unfortunately no. And if it was to even depend on the business, the Kikuyu business tycoons, those ones are more loyal to Uhuru Kenyatta than they are to Rigathi Gachagua. You even saw during the 2022 election, the billionaires from Mount Kenya sided with Uhuru Kenyatta in supporting Raila. They didn't go with Rigathi Gachagua in supporting Ruto. So chances of Rigathi Gachagua getting support, financial support, enough to push Kalonzo Musyoka throughout the country in terms of campaign are very limited. Not impossible, because people might decide from diaspora to contribute, but it will not be enough to run a serious campaign. Just to remind you, in Kenya, campaigns are very expensive, especially presidential campaigns. They are very expensive. The logistic itself will drain you. So you are looking at billions for campaign, and this is not some money you can just come by. So unless Rigathi is going to sell his assets in the name of trying to push for Kalonzo Musyoka to outdo Ruto in the campaigns, financially he is very limited. Then we come to Uhuru Kenyatta. Money is not a problem with the Kenyattas. They are ranked the richest family. So it will not be a big deal sponsoring Matiangi to campaign across the country. Even when it comes to launching political parties or launching presidential candidature, Uhuru Kenyatta doesn't hold back. If you look at Uhuru Kenyatta's politics, he doesn't hold back using money when it comes to making a statement. You remember how he launched TNA, how he went ahead and launched Jubilee, and of course, Uhuru Kenyatta, even now they launched Azimio. So Uhuru Kenyatta doesn't spare any expense to make a statement. So in terms of financial support, Matiangi has an upper hand. Kalonzo may really struggle. Another factor to consider here, which is real ground support. Kalonzo has the Ukambani voters behind him. That is, if we are going by the 2022 election results, you are looking at about 1 million votes. That is if you include canvass from the 3 counties, the ones in Nairobi, and of course the coast. You are looking at a voter turnout of at least 1 million. If you go the Kisii route, Matiangi, if is confirmed, is likely to get the backing of the Kisiis. And if you include the Kisiis in diaspora and the Kisiis in Kisii County and Nyamira County, you are also looking at about 900,000 votes. So it's not like a big difference between Kambas and Kisiis. I am not saying that Kambas and Kisiis are close in terms of population. I'm just referring to the 2022 voting results. That is why both candidates depend entirely on the support of Mount Kenya. Entirely. Without the backing of Mount Kenya, Kalonzo Musyoka has nothing to compete with in the race. Without the backing of Mount Kenya, one Fred Matiangi is dead on arrival. So, 2 things. Money works in favor of Matiangi. Kalonzo may not have money because Rigathi cannot support him. 2, in terms of base support, Kalonzo and Matiangi are almost drawing, though Kalonzo has a slight edge over Matiangi, but not with a wide margin. So they are going to depend on the Kikuyu vote. So the question is, who are the Kikuyus likely to go with? Well, this is where now we leave the stooges and come back to their masters, Uhuru Kenyatta versus Rigathi Gachagua. If Uhuru Kenyatta and Rigathi Gachagua stand at crossroads, like they are not reading from the same page, they fight each other, chances are that majority of Kikuyus, not all, are going to side with Rigathi Gachagua because Rigathi Gachagua is speaking clearly what they want to hear. Remember, Uhuru Kenyatta might be not supporting William Ruto, but he has been seen laughing with William Ruto whenever there is an opportunity and they look like they are friends. That is not something anybody has seen from Rigathi since he was impeached. Rigathi has been militantly attacking William Ruto. So if the two of them are at odds, they are not friends, they are fighting each other, then chances are that majority of Kikuyus will side with one Rigathi Gachagua. And if they do so, then Rigathi Gachagua can use that support and throw it behind Kalonzo Musyoka and give him a fighting chance against William Ruto. That would mean that Fred Matiangi would also vie, but without serious support. Maybe the few Kikuyus and some Kisii supporters, but not something that would make him as competitive as Kalonzo would be if Kalonzo got the votes. But here is the tricky part, ladies and gentlemen. Uhuru recently has toned down against Rigathi Gachagua. In fact, Uhuru was even telling members of his own party to respect Rigathi Gachagua, not to attack him. That was so different from the way he had engaged Rigathi Gachagua before. Remember, he had not even mentioned Rigathi Gachagua since Rigathi Gachagua was elected deputy president. And the fact that now he was looking like he's defending him meant that he changed his approach because he realized that if he goes militant, then the narrative that Jubilee is a red wheelbarrow would peak in the mountain and the Kikuyus will reject Uhuru again, the way they did in 2022. So he has softened his stance and he is now very polite towards Rigathi Gachagua. Should there be no problem between the two, then there will be a big challenge because should there be peace between the two, then Uhuru might use his money and influence in Mount Kenya to sway the public to support Matiangi. Maybe they convince Kalonzo to be a running mate, but either way, if there is no war between Rigathi and Uhuru Kenyatta in Mount Kenya, then chances are that Mount Kenya people will have a very soft spot for Uhuru Kenyatta than they would have for one Rigathi Gachagua. And if they did, that means they might likely join Jubilee again, because they have belonged to that party before, by the way. They might join the Jubilee party again and support Matiangi. So the question is, ladies and gentlemen, who will win and fly the opposition ticket? Well, it depends. And it depends entirely on how Kikuyus choose their leader. If there is peace between Rigathi and Uhuru Kenyatta, and Kikuyus choose to support Uhuru Kenyatta as their king, Rigathi and his Kalonzo would lose the battle. That means Fred Matiangi will run with the ticket. But if Kikuyus choose to stand with Rigathi Gachagua, then the chances of Matiangi flying the opposition ticket are very limited. Maybe he settles for the runners-up, or maybe he settles for the running mate position. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what, in my opinion, is going to decide who wins. The Kikuyus are going to decide. Whoever the Kikuyus are going to support between Rigathi and Uhuru will determine whether Matiangi or Kalonzo becomes the presidential candidate for the opposition party. So, ladies and gentlemen, as a recap, if we are to answer the question, who between Kalonzo and Matiangi would fly the opposition flag as the presidential candidate, the answer is very simple. It depends with who between Uhuru Kenyatta and Rigathi will the Kikuyus choose as their leader moving forward. Currently, there is that Uhuru is our king, Rigathi is our king. So you can't have two. Whoever they are going to settle on between Uhuru and Rigathi, that will determine who flies the opposition flag. If they went for Uhuru, Matiangi will be the presidential candidate for the united opposition. If they went with Rigathi, Kalonzo Musyoka will be the presidential candidate for the united opposition. I hope you found value in this video, ladies and gentlemen. If you did, let me know in the comment section below. Otherwise, don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends. And in case you missed the video where I shared why Uhuru Kenyatta is pushing Matiangi to vie for president, watch it here.